So let's talk about three particular decisions today that a lot of people love to make without thinking about them very clearly. Number two, without actually getting guidance and advice from the necessary professionals. And number three, often when people make these decisions, they think that they can be easily reversible or they can be easily altered, at a later stage. But they have no idea that the consequences that come with those type of decisions. And so today I want us to talk about them, right? For those that don't know me, my name is Yolanda Mnyengeza. I'm an attorney and I specialize mainly in estate planning and wealth protection. So let's start with the first decision that people love to make very loosely without getting advice or guidance and thinking they can easily reverse this one. And that is choosing the type of marital regime. We've talked about this before, right? A lot of people that I meet after they've gotten married, when they want to change the marriage or alternatively they want to get divorced, one of the things you will hear from them is that I thought we could easily make changes after the marriage. I thought it was not going to be a problem, or this was not going to be a problem. It's always, most of the time, I thought, but now the consequences are here. Then they start seeing that all of those thoughts were actually not accurate. They should have gotten some form of advice. For example, there are people who, want to get married and would often just get married in community of property. And then a month later, you'd hear, someone saying, listen, in this instance, I have a pension fund or I have a provident fund. I think I want to separate. What's going to be the consequences? And you're like, it's going to be the normal consequences. It's a 50-50 thing. They didn't imagine that. They're thinking in their minds that if it's a month or if it's 2 months or it's 6 months, it's not a big deal. We can't share. Forgetting that a marriage in community of property automatically carries those consequences as soon as a person gets married. But had they sourced the kind of advice that they needed prior, they would have made a better choice for themselves. Some of them you'd find they're saying later on, after they've gotten married, I'd like to change the regime. But now you're like, this has to be a two-way thing. It's not going to be about you. You can't change it on your own. Your spouse also has to agree. But now, as you know, often some of the spouses will not agree after the marriage, even though they probably would have had the same kind of mindset, right? Especially once they have seen the benefits that come with a marriage in community of property. And then you'd hear someone say, listen, is there a way we can change this? I thought this was not going to be, this big deal. But now they're finding out it's actually a big deal, and the other spouse has to now agree, and that proves to be a futile process. So this type of decision, it is important that you understand it before you choose a type of marital regime. For instance, just to add on the debacles that come with a marriage in community of property, some people would start saying, how can I be inheriting people's debts here? They start being angry about those, right? Because what happens is that creditors also start collecting or inquiring from them when the other spouse starts defaulting, because automatically they're in a marriage in community of property. And those are things that they did not envision, they did not think were part of the consequences, and so they just made the decision without the necessary understanding. So that's the first decision a lot of people love to make. Let's go to the second one. And the second decision that a lot of people love to make is the decision to register their child's surname to that of the father of the child, whereas they are not married to the father of the child. Now, this one I'm not going to go too deep, but I'm going to tell you about two consequences that often come with this one, which tend to be, a bit difficult or make things difficult for you, especially if you end up being a single parent, right? Again, a lot of people don't really seek advice about these things. they often say, I know what I'm doing, I think it's not going to be an issue. Then they make that particular decision. But let me tell you about certain problems that people who have made this decision often encounter, particularly where, this particular father of the child is refusing to be active in the child's life. First one is the fact that if let's say you are in a situation, you lose your job and you decide to apply for a government, grant. If the father of the child is in actual fact at a good job, and this can be noted, you are going to struggle to actually get anything from the government. You're going to, in fact, once they pick this up, it is going to be difficult for you to be approved to get that particular grant, because what is going to be said is that the parent of this child, who we can easily pick up on the system, is wealthy enough to take care of this child, and therefore you must go take them to court. And with a lot of people, as much as some will try to take them to court, they have found this process difficult, especially when they don't have the finances, right? So then this becomes a debacle. So people would then struggle not only with the fact that they don't have an income, they can't even get government assistance because a child has been registered in the name or the surname of the father, and the father refuses to be active. The other consequence is the fact that when you have to apply for certain things pertaining to the child, let's say a school, schools will often be insistent that the father of that child, who resembles that particular surname, must also be part of this application process. And you will struggle, especially if the father of the child in this particular situation is unwilling to be part of the child's life, or is unwilling to, go through with you throughout this whole process. Those are just the two consequences I'm going to go into, right? But this decision, you need to know why you're making it in the first place and how potentially it's going to affect not only you, because these things tend to affect the child more than anything, right? So make sure that you at least get some guidance to understand the depth of this kind of decision, particularly if you are not married to the child, because let me tell you now, it is difficult to get this overturned. Ask those that have been in the situation. Let's go to the third decision that people love to make without really understanding the consequences. Now, the third one is not necessarily legal in nature, right? But then we tend to get a lot of inquiries about this one, right? So this one is when people decide to buy a property. Again, a lot of people do this on their own, no guidance, and they don't even do their own research, in addition to not getting guidance, just to see how this works, the do's and don'ts, things to look out for. A lot of people just go into this and want to overturn it in the future and find out later that it's not as easy as flipping the situation. It comes with dire consequences or extreme consequences. So let's talk about this. So one of the things that we come across a lot is the fact that a lot of people would take out a bond to buy a property. But one of the mistakes they make is the fact that when they are being given or approved for a bond, instead of them assessing, what actually is something they can afford and doing research on some of the additional things that they might need to pay for, they would take up the whole approval that they have been given by the financial service provider. And sometimes that approval actually is just exactly what they can afford. Now, what then happens is the fact that when the interest rate goes up, or there's something that changes which then affects their premium, they can no longer afford that particular bond. Met a lot of people who said a year later, after taking a bond, they want out. But now the problem with this is this: as much as you may want out, buying a property utilizing a bond is much more serious and bears a lot of consequences, because we are now not talking about the value of the property. We are now also talking about the interest that was added on top. There are additional fees that were added on top, which you are liable for, which then make up the whole amount. So even if you were to say they must sell the property, you don't want it anymore, it's not going to pay for the rest of it. You will still owe the bank, right? Because it is not enough. That is why you often pay the bond over a 20-year period or a 15-year period, right? Because there are other additional costs that have been included there. This is a credit that was given to you. It's a debt. So a debt comes with what? It comes with interest. So now you find someone saying, I can't do this anymore. Do you see what this does? If you can't do this anymore and you allow them to sell it, it means now you owe them for the amount which they could not get from that particular house when they sold it. So which means you're going to pay for the rest of the money, yet you don't have a property. They've taken it back. See how dire these consequences are? Because you never really introspected, did your research, got some guidance as to what you need to think about when you're purchasing a property. Guys, when you're purchasing a property, this is a permanent decision. It's like having a child. It's like having a child. A child you have to raise for at least 18 years before you can say, whew, yeah, at least I feel some form of relief. As much as, the whole responsibility has not really gone away, but you feel some type of relief because now they're an adult. A house will take you 20 years to pay off. So you're taking up a responsibility. And this particular responsibility or this debt can go up, down, up, down. So you need to know exactly what you need to prepare yourself for before you make this decision. A lot of people out there who are now paying still the outstanding debt because they made this mistake. This is a decision meant to be, discussed with your financial advisor. Do your own research, understand how and what you're going to pay for before you put yourself in that kind of situation. Well, this brings us to the end of these 3 things that I wanted to talk about. But just be mindful, right? When you have to make legal and financial decisions, it always makes sense for you to take your time. It always makes sense for you to meet with someone who's an expert in this regard, just so that they can guide and make you understand the possible consequences of this kind of decision. On that basis, I'll see you next time.